Hey everyone. All right. We are streaming hopefully from our hotel at the annual conference of the Evangelical Theological Society meetings. Let us know how the stream is and if we're using public Wi-Fi, so we don't really know how the stream is. Okay, I just got the alert. So let us know how the stream is as you're jumping on. And nobody's here yet. So, okay. Hi, there's Elaine. So, Elaine, tell us how the stream is doing. If you can see and hear us okay. And Future's here.
What's up?
Okay, sounds good, right? Okay.
Awesome.
All right. Yeah, keep giving us feedback because we're using hotel Wi-Fi. So, all right, why don't you start over and just kind of talk about what the meetings are and everything.
Yeah, so we are at the Evangelical Theological Society meetings, and it is a place where the Christian academics, that's the better word than what I was going to use. Christian academics get together and read papers. And these papers are papers that they've written, and they read them to their audience about their ideas. Maybe they're refuting an idea that they see coming into Christianity or into evangelicalism. In order to present a paper, though, you have to be a PhD. And so someone like me could not present a paper. And Chris, can you present with a D-Min? But you can present with a THM.
I don't think so.
I think so. I saw someone with a THM present. So you have to definitely have a terminal degree in order to present. And so we've gone to quite a few papers so far and heard people's thoughts and ideas on things from transgenderism. I was mentioning that Dr. Scott Smith, who serves on our academic advisory council, gave a paper on the SB 107 bill here in California, which is a bill that protects youth, transgender youth. And so I call it like a child theory mixed with queer theory bill. It says that if a child is seeking protection from another state or within our state, they can come to California and find refuge here. I have done some
getting protection from their own parents.
Yes.
Who won't offer gender affirming care.
Well, I was going to say that we've had some conversations about it on the family meeting before, just looking at what is SB 107. It went into effect on January 1st of 2023.
Yeah. And Dr. Smith's paper is not published. It was really the first paper we went to yesterday. Gender Identity, Human Dignity, and California's Gender Affirming Care Law. It was probably one of the best papers that we've been to. Very solid. And I would love to be able to publish it as a white paper on our website. It's a wonderful resource, but I'm sure he'll probably try to get it published somewhere first. So definitely that was one of the highlights. What other highlights do you guys have?
Then we went to Joe Miller's talk. Joe Miller also serves on our academic advisory council. He did a paper looking at the idea of my truth and seeing my truth, the concept of, or the words, my truth, being able to use that as more of an opportunity for evangelism, kind of connecting people's truth or experience, and then bringing people, like even using the language. So some Christians are averse or opposed to even using the language of my truth. And he's like, well, if we can use the language of my truth and ground that into something that is real, even if it's based in their experience, how do we use that language and then bring them into what is real and biblical truth, and then be able to share the hope of the gospel with them?
Yeah. Anything you want to share?
Want to tell people who you are, just in case they don't know?
Hi. I'm Emily. I am Krista's daughter.
And you're the podcast producer.
I'm the podcast producer for Maven, the Maven Parent podcast with Brett and Aaron Kunkel. So I work over there, and then I've been hanging out with these guys all for over 24 hours now. Blink twice if you're in trouble. Yeah. So, but yeah, it's been great. I love hearing all the talks and everything. I think my favorite was Scott Smith's, because it was super practical to what's happening in our world today.
Yeah.
Because I think relating kind of like an academic talk to a current event that's happening is really, I mean, it's helpful for kind of the everyday person, which is awesome. So.
Yeah. Oh, Jen Beidel is on the stream, and she's also here at ETS. So chime in with what some of your highlights have been as well. Another interesting paper that all three of us went to yesterday was Carmen Imes' paper on Bathsheba and David. Carmen Imes is an Old Testament scholar. She is at Talbot School of Theology, and she is kind of created a little cottage industry for herself, that every 6 to 8 months, the topic of whether or not David raped Bathsheba, that's more than just adultery, that it was rape, comes up on social media, and she's kind of a person who has done a deep dive into that. There were aspects of her paper that I really appreciated, like asking questions of the text and trying to discern, what am I reading into the text because of my own cultural context and questions versus what does the text actually say. I think that was the real strength of her paper. There was a little too much talk about power dynamics. To me, that felt a little anachronistic, but it was light. She only mentioned the term once or twice, but it just felt like it was kind of lurking in the background there.
Yeah, I would definitely say that I felt like the latter part of the talk was power dynamic heavy. She really wants to encourage people not to read the text through Western lenses, and reminding us to go back to the culture of the Hebrew people, and what was happening in David and Bathsheba's time and all of that. But when we bring in this idea or this concept of power dynamics, yes, there were definitely power dynamics in the old time. Yet I can't look at today's idea of power dynamics and then transport that back. So David was a military man. David, was a king. David, da 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 da. So he automatically imposed his male privilege. And she didn't use these words, but that's kind of what I felt was like lurking back there. He used his privilege, his power, and all of these things that we see that are Western in their concept, really. And and then import that on the text. So while in one hand, it seemed like she was saying we need to remove our Western lens from the text as we read it, there was still this encouragement to apply a Western, what I would call critical theory power dynamic lens to the text. I don't know if that works.
It was a little confusing, but maybe I just didn't pick up on the subtleties of what she was doing there. I want to, she's a good scholar, and it was, there were parts of her paper that I really appreciated, and all of that. I don't know. Do you want to weigh in on that at all? Okay, all right. Then you guys tell us about the one that you guys went to by Ahrum Yu at the who's at Dallas Theological Seminary. The name of the paper was I/We, God and the Enemy, Israel's Lament as a Voice Calling for Social Justice. Okay, you two went to this paper. So
don't pass the mic. Pass it to her. I'm going to sit this one out.
Oh, no. Yeah, I don't know. That one was interesting. It was all about looking at the Psalms through the lens of lamenting, and then doing like a little bit of a critical reading of them, I guess.
Critical as in critical theory?
Kind of.
Yeah, she called it the critical method.
The critical, yeah.
So it's critical lament theory. And I mean, how do you make this? You can't make this up. And I personally am giving it that name, critical lament theory. I don't think it's interesting that if you put a U, it would be CULT, but that's a whole another thing. But critical, low key. What I'm calling critical lament theory is this one woman's endeavor to get people to lament. And in her words, she said, and I haven't written down, that the purpose of lament is to redistribute power. Yeah. What is the goal of much of the critical theories? It is this conversation of power. And how do we redistribute power? How do we have equity in regards to power relations? She wants us to lament to be able to break down, roles of power, to be able to uplift and to fight for social justice, to break down these binaries. But what do you do when eventually God becomes the oppressor? Because he has the ultimate power. We can't pretend that these godless frameworks and these frameworks that were created by men who hated God will eventually lead us to a place of worshiping God more. It's going to lead us away from God. And I asked her specifically, what do you do with, in conversations with people who uphold binary? What do you do when God eventually becomes the oppressor? And she told me flat out, well, I can't answer that question. And so she didn't. She went on to talk about something completely different. But we can't sit here and then just pretend while everybody's giving her snaps and, acting like there was nothing wrong with her conversation, that there's nothing wrong with the conversation. We are not here to pretend today, people.
But then something happened. Oh, man, your family. Then
I leave, okay? We got to go to the next round and bout of foolishness. I leave, and as I'm leaving, her moderator, because each paper is presented within a block of like 4 papers. Yeah. And there's one person who moderates all of the conversation. Okay. So they are responsible for introducing the presenter and then fielding the questions. The moderator runs after me as I'm leaving and is like, that was such a good question. She was so endearing. It was such a good question. It's really hard when we talk to people who believe in the binary. Those conversations can be really difficult. I would encourage you to continue to research and think about how, when we talk to people who believe in the binary, how can we really basically get around that conversation or have better conversations with people who believe in the binary.
To break down the binary.
To break down, yeah. Now, I did not say, honey, I am a binary believer, because I just wanted to see where this conversation was going to go. I just thanked her for her encouragement. This.
Do you want to comment on that?
I want to say with the lament thing, it's specifically about your prayer to God, and it was turning your prayer to God into a social justice act, which she called it lament is a protest to God.
Yes.
And that, I don't know, that kind of protest language, or it's a way to redistribute your power with God. That's of like when was the thing I was reading into it. It was, yeah.
It's foolish, but it reminded me of when I was praying to the Lord back in 2018, 2019, that you would recognize your whiteness.
I repent of my whiteness.
Yes, Father, touch it, Jesus. Touch it. Let her repent. Okay, that's okay.
Then the Lord told you to repent. That's my favorite part of the story.
I don't want to talk about it.
All right. So while they went to the we paper, the lament and social justice paper, I ran across the hall and went to a paper by another Dallas seminary professor. There's nowhere for her to scoot.
Oh, I meant you.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Daniel Steffen. And I should say that the theme this year is global evangelicalism. So there's a lot of cross-cultural, intercultural conversations, international speakers from Africa. One of the plenary speakers is African. So there's a lot of that flavor. What are you doing?
Nothing. I was going to see if this made a difference. But it does. Never mind.
We need that. All right. So this paper by this other Dallas seminary professor was called Global Contextualized Interpretations of the Sermon on the Mount. And this is related to my doctoral dissertation. So I thought, it'd probably be good for me to go to this. So I went to, it really should have been called contextual. I don't talk when you're talking.
It was an accident. Sorry.
It really should have been called something about just one verse in the Sermon on the Mount. It was really just, what does it mean to say, blessed are the poor, or the poor in spirit? And basically he wanted to give kind of a look at how different cultures all understand the phrase blessed are the poor. So he gave what he called a first world interpretation, and then he went to a third world interpretation. And his thesis that I wrote down was that Matthew's presentation of the Sermon on the Mount is more accurately understood by third world interpreters, that they have a certain, what we call epistemic privilege, to be able to understand the phrase blessed are the poor. Then we can't really get there as first world interpreters. That was the gist of the paper. Do you want to say something?
So I just spoke with a pretty prominent theologian, and I'm not going to mention his name just because I haven't gotten permission to mention his name, and I really respect him. But we were, and I'm having a follow-up conversation with him. We were really talking about how do you get to a final interpretation of the text? If there's a Black interpretation, there's a Somali interpretation, there is a interpretation for people who are coming out of, I don't know, third world nation, fourth world nations. How do you ever, get to a true meaning of the text? We can all have all of these different interpretations, and I understand that I bring my own culture to a text and I bring my own emotional baggage and all that, but the goal isn't simply for me to come to a table with a bunch of people from all these different intersections, because that's really what it is, all of these different intersections in life or standpoints, and say, well, when I read this text, this is really what I get. What do you get? And now, okay, great, now we all understand what we get from various texts, but at the end of the day, there has to be objective truth. What does the text actually mean? We were listening to Preston Sprinkle in his talk, and he mentioned just offhandedly, like, well, there are several interpretations to a text. And I'm like, I'm no theologian, but if there are several interpretations to a text, how do we ever get to the right one? Or am I just left to wonder, and I can only figure out the right interpretation when I get to heaven and I ask Jesus?
Well, I think that this is the very question that I'm exploring in my dissertation, is all of these standpoints. And it seems like in the literature, there's no conversation anymore about trying to get to the author's meaning. The author has been completely abandoned.
Because the author is white. Like, when you think about authorial intent, that is something that I believe many who are doing standpoint epistemology want to jettison, because it no longer is me-centered. It's no longer centered on the poor. It's no longer social justice centered. So we have to really get to, what does the text mean to you?
Yeah, they don't want to say that. They don't want to say that out loud, of what does it mean to you.
But it's not just the you, it's the what does it mean to, this is the bad way to say it, and I mean, you're the one who's studying this, so maybe I'm wrong, but what does it mean to everybody else who's not white?
Well, they look at the quote unquote white interpretation. They call that the colonial perspective, or the first world perspective. In the literature, they talk more about interpretive communities, and how does a particular community understand something. But that just leads me right into the next block that I went to in the afternoon yesterday, was a discussion about a book called Reading the Bible Latinamente. And it was a whole Latina biblical and theological reflection unit on this one book, of how do Latinos read the Bible? What is their lens? And that's my dissertation, because this is an assumed operating assumption that's unquestioned. And so you have all these different interpretive communities, but nobody's talking anymore about how do I get to the original meaning or the author's meaning. You just kind of look at the text as it was preserved for a particular community in a particular time and place. And then you have the interpretive community today, and they look at those details and they might understand it differently. So in this Latina unit, they were looking, for example, on the issue of immigration. And so they would say, well, we have a unique epistemic privilege to talk into the issue of immigration, because we're all immigrants in this country. So anytime the Bible talks about a passage related to immigration, they ought to be kind of the deferred community to go to for insight about the passage. And so I'm trying to be as fair as possible. I might have some nuances a little bit incorrect there, but that's kind of the gist of the project.
Yes. And so as I was just having a conversation with someone and we talked a bit about this, their response was, sorry, what community though are you talking about? So are you talking about the Cubans who were Latin? Are you talking about Puerto Ricans who were Latin? Are you like, how do you not collapse them all into one monolithic group?
So that was a question in the thing. And so that they had 3 different Latin contexts as authors on this book. So one was from an Argentinian point of view. One was what was it? He was like either Costa Rican or Puerto Rican, and the other one was Mexican, I believe. And so they were coming from different within the Latino experience, but they're looking for common threads within that culture. But they recognize that tension, that not all Latino people have the same experiences, and that there's variances even within that community. That was acknowledged.
My question would be, how do you handle then someone who might have a more theologically conservative opinion, thought process on it? Do you just categorize their thoughts and opinions as basically being white? Because that's what it comes down to. Like, if I don't uphold, and I'll use this as being Black, because we'll get to that conversation in a minute. But if my thoughts and ideas and theological understanding of the word and hermeneutics don't align with this low-key anti-racist, racial reconciliation, James Conian kind of idea, well, I'm white. And so I'm wondering if they would say that the people who don't uphold their narrative or their way of interpreting scripture are like, you just get kicked out of the camp. They're also white.
No, they would just say that you need everybody at the table. You need as many perspectives as possible. You need to have a rainbow of perspectives. Everyone brings a little something to their interpretation of the text. So imagine your small group at church. You want to have as many standpoints available as possible, because everybody is bringing their experience to the text. So it's like a rainbow, or you're expanding the scope. There's different metaphors that people in this contextualization camp use.
But my question then is, what if we are all wrong?
Well,
like there has to be some truth. Like, what is the standard of truth?
They don't really talk like that. So it's hard for me to answer. They don't use the word truth. They just talk about that we're in a dialogue with the Bible. So we ask the Bible questions. The more conservative ones will say that the Bible asks us questions. The more progressive ones will say it's a one-way conversation, where we're just asking questions of the Bible, and we just focus on the parts that are relevant to our interpretive community. This is my whole dissertation. This is what this is.
The answer.
There's no answer. You're thinking about it all wrong. There's no answer.
No, there is an answer.
There's no answer.
There is an answer. Because if Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, I have to believe that there is truth. I have to believe that. Otherwise, we just all sitting around playing patty cake and shooting our ideas across the table. At some point, can we just get to the reality that I don't care about your ideas? Like that can be a thing. Like can I have a spot here where I can write a paper on, I don't care about your ideas? Like, I want to know truth. That's mean. I know. Father, forgive me. I need to stop.
Yeah, they just don't talk like that. And when you read the literature, they don't talk about concepts like truth or standard. This is what makes the literature so confusing for me as I've been going through it, is I'm asking those kinds of questions. And I finally realized they're not asking that question. You know, when we're looking at going to the Latino group yesterday, they're just wanting to bring together everybody's interpretive communities for like collaboration and dialogue. I don't know. Do you want to add anything? You have more of the English literature background.
Yeah, I mean, they're not looking for an answer per se. They want to look at the Bible through this kaleidoscope rather than just looking at it, I guess.
Yeah.
So
it's as you're reading, the tension is you're reading their books inspectionally to understand what they're saying.
Right.
But yet when it gets to the Bible, I can't do that. I can't read it inspectionally to come to what the author is meaning. And to me, that's the part of it that just breaks down, is they want me to read their book inspectionally and to understand their meaning, and their meaning comes from the author. I mean, anyone who's ever had a fight with their husband knows that. You say things like, that's not what I mean. I didn't mean it like that. Well, now we're in a question about authorial intent. That's how it works in the real world. You got a lot of thoughts.
I do, but my thoughts ain't helpful. It's just not.
Okay, so this morning then, yeah.
Are they believers? That's a question I ask.
Oh boy. Let's see. What is this one? Victoria says, also, Krista, you are right. People might not even have the right words or the questions to ask. I know I struggle at times with that. Elaine says, I struggle with not knowing that there's an answer somewhere. Yeah. Shouldn't they be asking as many questions as possible to get a big picture and a broader scope? To some degree, yeah. There is something to asking a lot of questions of the text.
I'm not opposed.
Yeah, that's a good, when I teach Bible interpretation, that's actually the very first step that I teach people, is to ask questions. And when I was homeschooling Emily, like nearly every assignment, she had to come up with 5 questions to ask about a lecture or about a passage, or 10. Okay.
But I mean, even in my hermeneutics class, in hermeneutics, we would read a passage and then we would need to write as many questions as we could. And there was a limit, it was like 15 or 20 questions, but we had to, write all these questions. I'm not saying don't write questions. I'm not even saying that there are stupid questions. The questions can be valid. What I'm saying is that truth exists. And so if truth exists, the project of just answering the questions fails you if you do not arrive at truth, because scripture is truth. And there is a way to find out what an author truly meant in their writing, who they were writing to, how that person would have understood what was being said, how the writer would have understood something. Like, all of this is possible. And so to say, well, the person in the third world country gets this more than this person here, makes me wonder, well, why do you say that? And how do you know that the poor person in Los Angeles and the poor person in Guadalajara, wouldn't arrive at the same conclusion, or that the white middle class or upper class rich person, when they read the text, that they can't get to the right conclusion or answer.
Okay, so let's talk briefly about what we went to today.
We met Mike Winger, Allison.
Yeah, Monique and Emily met Mike Winger. I missed out. I had to run back to the room. So, all right. So this morning we went to a couple of talks in a module called Other Voices. And this is where they kind of had scholars who were working in other cultural contexts. I'm trying to think of the best way to say it. So, yeah. So the first one up was, the paper was called, it was a professor from Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary in Boston, Calling of God or Colonial Oppression, ? Native American Views of Joshua's Conquest. And I thought this was going to be some wacky liberation theology paper, but it actually turned out it was done by an older gentleman. Man, he couldn't have been a sweeter, kinder, older guy. I mean, I felt bad like even asking him any questions. I'm like, this guy is so nice, and he's an older man, and I want to be respectful. But his paper was essentially almost a light critique of liberation theology. And I appreciated what he was trying to do. I'm going to try to get a copy of his paper from my file. I might use some ideas from it in my dissertation, but it was not what I was expecting it to be. And basically he was saying, stop using the Exodus and the Joshua's conquest as like an archetype for slavery and conquering. It was a one-time historical event. And that was it. So
I appreciate it.
I went up to him afterwards and I kind of restated his thesis back to him. And then I asked him, would you see this as a light critique, pushback against liberation theology? I'm not sure he had ever thought about that, but I asked him about like kind of Palestinian liberation theology and stuff. And he was like, oh, yeah, I haven't really thought about that. That's interesting. So to me, that was sort of useful. Then there was a second paper that we went to with an African scholar who was here. I forget from.
He was from Kenya.
Kenya. I was gonna say. So his was Undoing Theological Baggage of Colonial Legacies on African Evangelicals. I'll let you describe that one.
Go ahead. Go ahead. It's okay.
Oh well.
It's okay. I'm just gonna be here for the commentary.
Basically, the gist of his. Well, first of all, this was the sad part of it to me, was you could tell he had been educated in the West, and he used every critical theory buzzword you can possibly imagine. And that his general thesis was that post-colonial scholarship is helpful and being an evangelical in Africa is complicated. That was his general thesis.
I don't disagree that being an evangelical in Africa, in some African nations, can be difficult because you have things. Well, one, you need to define what an evangelical is. But then you also have, honor shame culture. You have traditional African religions. There's a lot that's happening in the African context at times. However, I don't think that post-colonial theory is the answer to that. I really don't. I think that it's missing a lot. He wanted to, talk about things like hegemony or a hegemonic discourse. And I'm like, do you understand that the scriptures themselves create a hegemonic discourse? Like they are a ruling narrative. Like they are, like we don't come to the text of scripture saying, I know more than, or how do we break down, this narrative? No, the scriptures are a ruling narrative. They are a thread throughout the beginning of time straight to today. And so my thought to him was, he really needs to put some boundaries up. He really needs to be careful. He also talked about, moving away from
South Africa scholar spoke up at the end and brought that up to him, and he wasn't really buying that.
He wasn't. Yeah. Or that we need to move away from the binary. Well, I don't the fact that he comes from an African nation, binaries are truly true in African nations. They about the binary. Okay, because men have roles and women have roles. And so I was confused as to why are you looking to break down these binaries when your nation is very binary? Like, there are roles for women, there are roles for men. And I'm sure he was probably more talking about like this oppressed oppressor binary and narrative, and breaking down some of the colonial ways of being, remnants of colonialism. And so it was so interesting because just a couple months ago, not even a couple months ago, about a month ago, I was asked to speak in Kenya. Unfortunately, it was on Thanksgiving, so I declined. But part of what they wanted me to address was the issue of evangelicalism and colonialism. Part of the problem that I think many people see in some African nations is, and he even mentioned this, it is not understanding where the person is a missionary and really working for, God and the good of God, or if they are a Western person really trying to get me to buy in just to Western thought and mentality. It, yeah, it was a lot, but it was a lot of just critical theory. And I'm sympathetic because I know that in especially some Eastern African nations, there's a lot of breakdown and just mixture and trying to understand what does it mean to be a Christian. The question that I wanted to ask, but there were way too many people when it was over, was, if colonialism is such a problem, why did your nation move away from Christianity in exchange for colonialism? Because truly Christianity was in Africa before colonialism. So, yeah.
Yeah, it was, I think, who was Alexandria is hitting on kind of was my thought is it's sad how the US is bringing these harmful progressive ideologies to other countries.
Mhm.
The question I wanted to ask him, but I couldn't think of a diplomatic way of saying it. I was afraid there would be too much language barrier because I think English may have been his second language.
Or third or fourth, because they speak a lot of different languages.
Yeah, is I get your project that you think that post-colonialism can be a helpful analytical framework for identifying problems. That's near verbatim of what he said in his paper. But what I wanted to ask him was, can you not see how the West is continuing to send ideas into Africa to destroy your culture? It's different now. Instead of coming under the guise of Christianity, it's coming under the guise of the UN and these kind of secular progressive ideas and the money that's attached to them. But I just didn't know how to say that diplomatically, but I felt like, he might not see that it is a form of colonialism.
Yeah, it really is. Another thought that he had was that he wanted, more interfaith opportunities or conversations. And I really had a question of, he wanted interfaith, and let me say this before I list my question: interfaith opportunities, breaking down the binary and things like that, because his goal was to stop the othering that can happen at times where, these people are left out or felt like they don't belong in Christianity and things like that. And the South African gentleman really stated my question before I got the opportunity to, and he was like, but the gospel others. The gospel creates an othering situation, and it might not feel good all the time, but when we become children of God, when we become that nation, that royal priesthood, there it's an other. It's not this all-inclusive, come on, we're all just gonna kumbaya together. No, we are a unique people. And that is the gospel's work. It's not the work that we do.
Okay, one last thing. Let's talk about, or actually, we have two other quick papers. I want to do the good one first, and then we'll do the harder one. We went late this morning. The last one we went to was a paper by a PhD student at Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. He said he read part of his dissertation to us, and it was entitled From Babel to Pentecost and Beyond, a Biblical Theological Response to Stephen Wolf's Christian Nationalism. And I have to say, boy, was that a helpful paper. And I think that there's aspects of Stephen Wolf's project that I agree with. And I think that we're all wrestling right now with how to have a more robust theology of nations. And connected to that is the question of a theology of ethnicity. And since that's something you and I have been working on, I'm interested in this project. And I know that Stephen Wolf says some things that are a little confusing to me on Twitter, but his book is asking important questions, and I think that there needs to be more public dialogue about these issues. And this doctoral student, his name is Michael Carlino, is kind of doing his dissertation on Stephen Wolf, Doug Wilson, and Van Drunen, who's over at Westminster West, and working through their different models of quote unquote Christian nationalism or nationalism. I think is a very important and valuable conversation. I felt like his paper, while technical, put into words some of my intuitions that I've been having over the last couple of years about Wolf's book. He looked at one particular assumption of the book and analyzed it in detail through a redemptive historical lens. I thought it was very helpful. He also works for Christ Overall, which our friend Kevin Briggins has published some stuff through them. I really like what they're doing over there. Anyways, those are some my thoughts. I don't know if you want to say anything about the Wolf paper. Okay. Then finally, we'll talk about the paper from Cornerstone Theological Seminary, a professor there that's in Michigan, and our friend Doug Gruteis teaches there now. This one is called Injustice and Memory Toward a Theology of Corporate Repentance and Reconciliation. No, I had to do the other one.
So I'm trying to figure out even where to start. It's basically an anti-racism paper. Like it was a paper based on that talked a lot about racial reconciliation and how what needs to happen for white and black people to reconcile. Like there needs to be lament, there needs to be an understanding. This is for white people because I feel like I know the history, but white people need to lament, they need to repent for their participation in racism or systems of racism, their complicity. They need to know history. Do you understand who Emmett Till was? Do you understand Medgar Evers? Do you understand, the list goes on and on. How are white people in their churches taking time to have true confession, true prayers of confession and prayers of repentance and lament. Again, who knew that critical lament was a thing? I showed up just unprepared to talk about critical lament. Okay, but here we are. And so that was his whole talk. It was really just over and over and over again about what white people must do. And I was surprised at the amount of white people just nodding in agreement. I was like, y'all just go ahead then. Reparations and all that. And so at the end, I gently raised my hand and I asked the question of how do you know? Like, first of all, I asked to start everything out, I said, am I understanding you correctly when you say that any racial discrimination is a form of racism? He said, yes. Okay, so that's off the table. We already know that as long as there is not discrimination, discrepancy. I'm sorry. As long as there's racial disparity, as long as there's a racial disparity, okay, then that is racism. So anytime there's two white people and only one black, it's racist. Racial disparities are a form of racism. And so we got clarity on that. And so then I asked him, well, can you help me understand when white people have done enough? Because either it really sounds like you're participating in Kendi's form of anti-racism, where white people need to continuously, always be working to end racism because there are racial disparities all the time, or it is some kind of James Cone approach that says only Black people can tell white people when they've done enough. And he couldn't answer the question. He went around, and to me, I mean, and you guys might feel different. You might feel like he answered the question properly. That's fine. To me, he didn't answer the question because he was like, well, I can't quantify it. But you can surely tell people what they got to do. So then if you can tell, like, when is the bucket ever filled?
Yeah. When I talked to him afterward, I was trying to think of how I could approach him with something positive.
You are so gracious.
But still ask him a strategic question. And so the first thing I said to him was, I noticed that you used the word must at least 25 times in your talk. I counted them. And he looked a little
befuddled,
a little surprised. And he said, oh my. And so that was a little bit rough feedback. I thought, oh, I'm kind of off on a rough start here. And then I said, I think that the longing of your heart is that you want white people to come engage with you on this topic. I think that's what you're really wanting. He said, oh, yes, definitely. I'm like, okay. I said, well, what I have found is that people like me who are on the more conservative side of the conversation, what helps us participate with you more is if you have specifics. But you gave a whole talk about racial reconciliation without telling me what I must do in order to be reconciled. And it was a little confusing to him, I think, but maybe I gave him something to think about. And I said, yeah, I think if you were to add some specifics of what I must, because you kept telling me I must do something, but you never told me what I must do. And I said, so if you want to bring people like me into the conversation and engage with us, you're going to have more specifics. And he immediately said, well, reparations will be part of that. I said, okay, that's fine. I said, but you need like 4 or 5 of those points if you're going to bring people like us along, because then we can engage on the biblical foundation for each of those. And there's no widespread agreement among racial reconciliation advocates as to what those steps are. And he acknowledged that quickly. He said, you're right, there isn't. And so I felt kind of affirmed in some of the points that we make in our book, because he did exactly what we said in our book, is that they will agree with us on salvation identity. People in that Christian anti-racism crowd, which he did. He had a whole section in his paper on Ephesians 2.
But he did not agree that we were reconciled, because that was another question that I asked him.
And that was so I brought that to his attention, as I said, you're collapsing 2 different biblical uses of the word reconciliation. He didn't know what I meant, but he gave me his card. He invited, to keep dialoguing with him. And so I don't want to like put him on blast here. I felt a little bit confirmed in some of the things that we were saying in our book, that, these are the points that we're highlighting, and how reconciliation on that side of the discussion is a destination. Whereas in our model that we're putting forward and walking in unity is, what difference does it make when it's a starting point?
So after my question to the speaker, they break, and quickly a white guy comes up to me, snuggles on up, and is like, can I help answer your question to bring some clarity? Now, I surely did not think I was unclear, but apparently,
as a white person.
Yeah. As a white, he wanted to help bring clarity to me because he was a white person. He said, as a white person, can I, help bring clarity to your question? I was like, sure. Let's see how this goes. So he wanted to really work toward reconciliation because of 2 Corinthians 5. Like, we had this long go round. And so I asked him, well, what's your biblical warrant? And he was like, 2 Corinthians 5. He repeated 2 Corinthians 5. And I was like, no, you don't understand me. Well, what's your biblical warrant? And so he repeated 2 Corinthians 5. And I said, well, 2 Corinthians 5 doesn't actually talk about race. And it's not about reconciliation between man. And then he paused. And I told him, I was like, well, in reality, like the idea of race that we talk about today is not something that we really find in scripture. And so then he swam over to a bunch of other things. And I was like, but why do you think that you need to be reconciled to me? Like, what work can you do to actually reconcile yourself to me? And he wanted to go back through history and the offense. And I was like, well, what offense have you with me? What do I have? What ought do I have with you? And I said, in reality, we're family. Like the Bible tells us over and over again that we're family. Like John 1 or Ephesians. And he was like, well, what in Ephesians? And I was like, well, take chapters 1-3. It's all the things that we can't do ourselves that Christ has done that makes us family. And then so he quickly swam. He was like, well, in Ephesians 4, it tells us to be unified. And I said, actually, what it tells us in Ephesians 4 is to maintain that unity and to walk that out. And how do we do that well? And then he was like, well, we might be more, alike than we are, we might actually have,
we might agree more than
we might agree more. Yeah. And then he left. And y'all, I was so hot. I can't even lie. Like, I need to learn to not be as emotional. Cause I'm like, I'm here for the tussle. I need to not tussle. Like, can we just like, I don't know. I don't know. But he got me because I was like, why do you want to come to me? After you just sat through a whole talk that basically told everybody that if you want to know how to get along, if you want to know how to have reconciliation, you should really find a Black person. And then the Black person speaks and you want to correct me? Y'all, I was there was a lot of me that I was like, Father, please help me not to be as petty as I want to be. The Lord came through. Won't he do it?
Okay, as we close out here, go check out our book, Walking in Unity, if you want to know more about these. We got some new people on the stream tonight. So let's look at Sarah's question here. I don't recognize her name. I think she's new. Sarah Wynn. So her question is, I don't know how to ask this. That's okay. That's what we're here for. But does this definition only apply to his colonist idea of racial differences, white versus minority? Or would that include international cultural definitions of race, like racism present during the Rwandan genocide between the Hutus and the Tutsis, both of which are Black, but the Hutus didn't see them as equals?
I'm trying to. I don't know if she was talking about the first one.
Yeah.
Or
so just address the
when
general issue there.
I think it would all come down to power dynamics. And so if there is a group that is participating in power and is seen as being oppressive toward another group, they probably would say that there is some version of colonialist thought, whiteness, because that can all show up. This oppressive nature can still show up in people who are of the same skin tone. They would probably say that it's learned behavior instead of just the sinful nature of people. So I hope that answers your question. If it doesn't answer your question, write us at info@centerforbiblicalunity.com and you can thread it through more a little bit and I'll be able to answer it.
Now, you were just in Uganda a couple months ago, and this is similar to a situation that you faced speaking in Uganda, that everybody in the room is Black, so superficially they all look the same, yet they have very real tribal conflicts with each other. And so our position of American racism is it's a version of tribalism. Mm-hmm. It's just the American version of it. But the deeper structural problem is that of tribalism, and we as humans will find ways to divide from one another, to group together, and to problematize the other group. And so very much like the principles that we talk about would have application even in that non-American context.
Yes. I would say in Uganda, a lot of it again boils down to who has power. So it's a lot of power conversations. People with power are seen as oppressive against those who don't have power and things like that. You know what I wanted to mention though, is there was a Black guy sitting next to me right before the white guy came over, and the black guy, who I would definitely say is either anti-racist or definitely sympathetic to anti-racist, thoughts. He looked at me after my question and was like, oh my gosh, like, I've never thought about that. That's such a great question. I don't want people to feel like they have to work continuously forever. And yet the white guy came over and was like, let me explain your error. It was awesome. We have to go.
Yeah. All right. Hopefully this was helpful. A little bit about our adventures at the Evangelical Theological Society meetings. Global evangelicalism. So tomorrow we've got some more talks. Our friend Dr. Chris is giving a talk on a 350-page white paper that she helped supervise about transgenderism and the medical literature related to transgenderism. We're going to be going to her paper. You might remember her. She's been on our All the Things podcast a couple of times. She's a medical doctor, board certified OBGYN, and has been looking into the transgender medical stuff. There's also, I think we're going to go to another sequence related to Black theology tomorrow. And so
I'm telling you, y'all need to start like a white theology. Y'all because a lot of this stuff is just Black nationalism. Y'all need to come strong one ETS and be like, boom.
They would say that the whole
here we are.
The whole conference is already white. So that's the rejoinder to that. All right, friends. Okay. We will see you soon. Giving Tuesday is coming very soon. Yes. So mark it on your calendar. It's very late this year. It's the Tuesday after Thanksgiving, but we want to start talking about it because it is the CFBU's largest day of giving. And very soon we're going to have on our website more about Giving Tuesday. I made a social media post this afternoon about it. So mark your calendars, December 3rd, tie a string around your finger, set an alarm clock, do whatever you got to do to wake up and think about Giving Tuesday on December 3rd.
Yeah. Please consider giving to the Center for Biblical Unity. Our giving has been down this year. And so we are looking to close a gap in the giving that we haven't received this year. And then to also fund some projects for next year. And so we are completely funded by regular people, just like me, you guys, people who give $100 here, $50 there, $20, here. And so either consider maybe giving on Giving Tuesday, or on Giving Tuesday becoming a monthly partner. It would be such a blessing to us and allow us to continue in ministry. So, and with that